The court agreed she was robbed. The timestamps said otherwise. One of them was lying. And before this is over, you're going to question which one. Not once, but twice. When people talk about plagiarism, they picture a thief. Someone who takes something that isn't theirs and gets caught. The story is simple. The villain is obvious. But what happens when the supposed victim is the one who built the lie? Carefully, patiently, over 18 months, and nearly got away with it. Stop. Because that framing isn't quite right either, and that gap between what this case looked like and what it actually was is where this whole thing gets dangerous. That's not a plagiarism story. That's something darker. And the darkest part has nothing to do with the author, the manuscript, or even the verdict. I'll get to that. But you need to understand the architecture of the lie first. Her name was Carla Voss, a freelance editor from Portland, mid-40s, with one unpublished novel she'd been working on for years. The kind of person you'd describe as quietly talented, someone who knows the industry, knows how it works, and knows exactly how much it stings to watch other people succeed, while your manuscript sits in a drawer. The author she accused was Daniel Merritt. His debut novel, The Hollowing, came out in the spring, and within 6 weeks, it was on every major bestseller list. Spare prose, a psychological thriller structure, set in a coastal town that felt specific and lived in. Critics used words like assured and inevitable. The kind of book that makes other writers furious just by existing. And Carla wasn't just furious. She had a theory. She said she'd read an early version of it and recognized it as hers. Here's what nobody asked at the time, and what Carla was almost certainly counting on no one asking. But we'll get there. She filed her claim in March. Her attorney presented what looked, on the surface, like a compelling case. Carla had a manuscript. It shared a coastal setting with Merritt's novel, a female protagonist with a dissociative condition, and a third-act structural choice that her lawyer called statistically improbable to occur independently. That phrase is worth pausing on. Most plagiarism cases live or die on copied text, sentences lifted, passages rearranged. This one didn't. There was no smoking gun sentence. What Carla's team argued instead was structural, and that made it almost impossible to disprove. The structural choice in question was a specific narrative inversion. The protagonist's condition causes her to experience the novel's climax before its inciting incident, a device that requires the entire book to be architected around a single reveal in the final 30 pages. Literary analysts brought in as expert witnesses testified that in their combined review of roughly 4,000 psychological thrillers published between 2010 and 2022, they had found that exact construction used just twice. The odds of two writers arriving at it separately, in the same genre, in the same 2-year window, were, according to their testimony, vanishingly small. If you were watching the trial, you would have believed her. Most people did. She also claimed she had shared the manuscript with a writing group, one that Merritt had briefly attended 2 years earlier. That writing group detail. Remember it, because the way it falls apart is not what you'd expect. Copyright infringement cases in the US hinge on 2 things: access and substantial similarity. Carla's team argued she'd proven both. Merritt had been in the room. The book looked like hers. The court agreed there was enough for trial. What followed was 18 months of depositions, motions, and countermotions. Merritt's publisher spent heavily on his defense. Carla's legal costs were crowdfunded. Small donations from writers who believed her, who'd been following the case on social media, who saw in her story their own fear that something they'd created could be taken without consequence. She became, for a while, a cause. Writers' forums treated the case as a referendum on how the industry protects unknowns against people with platforms and money. Literary Twitter used the phrase, "believe creators." A podcast episode about her case got 2 million downloads. And then, in November, the jury found in her favor. She stood outside the courthouse in the rain and cried. Not performed crying, the real kind, where someone can barely get words out. She said, "I just want people to know that your work matters, that you matter, that this industry cannot keep taking from people who have nothing left to give." It was, by any measure, a moment. There is one person who watched that press conference and did not feel moved. I'll tell you who in a moment, and why that matters more than the verdict itself. 3 weeks later, a journalist named Priya Anand published a piece in a digital arts magazine. She had been covering the case since the beginning, not as an advocate, just as a reporter. And she had done something no one else had done, not a whistleblower, not a disgruntled insider. One reporter. A public records request. A Tuesday afternoon. She had filed for the metadata on Carla's original manuscript file. Everyone had been looking at the story, the emotion, the expert testimony, the structural parallels. Anand looked at the file. And files don't perform. Files just record. The timestamp on the document showed it was created 14 months before the trial, which was consistent with Carla's account. But Anand had also obtained, through a separate source inside Merit's publisher, the metadata from his editorial submissions folder. The first full draft of the hollowing had been uploaded to his agent's server on a Tuesday in February. 4 days before Carla's file showed it was even created. 4 days, not 4 years, not 4 months, 4 days. Let that land, don't move past it. Because everything you just watched, the crowdfunding, the writing group, the expert testimony about structural improbability, the rain, the tears, the 2 million podcast downloads, every single piece of it was downstream of that number. 4 days. The distance between a credible victim and a carefully constructed fraud measured not in evidence or argument or emotion, but in a timestamp that nobody thought to check until one reporter filed a records request on a Tuesday afternoon. The implication was immediate and total. Carla hadn't written her manuscript and then had it stolen. She had read Merit's book, likely a leaked or shared advance copy, which circulate in publishing constantly, and then written something that resembled it, backward engineered to appear as though it came first. And the writing group, that detail I told you to remember? What the investigation found there is either the most damning piece of the whole case or the most ambiguous, depending on what you think people are capable of. I'll come back to it. Anand's piece did not accuse Carla of fraud in those words. She simply published the timestamps and asked a question. How do you square this? What happened next was not a retraction and not an arrest. It was silence, and then chaos, and then something more uncomfortable than either. Carla's legal team issued a statement saying the metadata was unreliable, that timestamps could be manipulated, that the real question was why a publisher would have motive to fabricate them. Some of her supporters held on to that. Others quietly deleted their posts. And here is the thing that makes that argument almost impossible to fully dismiss, and almost impossible to fully believe. Timestamps can be manipulated. That's technically true, but the metadata chain Anand documented ran across 3 independent systems: Merit's personal device, his agent's server, and a third-party editorial platform. Fabricating alignment across all three, retroactively, without triggering any audit flags, would require the kind of coordination that makes conspiracy theories embarrassing. The simpler explanation was sitting right there. Merritt's attorneys filed for a new trial. His publisher announced they would seek to recover legal costs. The award Carla had won, just under $200,000, was frozen pending appeal. Now, the writing group. What investigators found when they went back through the group's records was not that Merritt had access to Carla's manuscript. It was that Carla had, for a period of roughly 8 months before she filed her claim, been corresponding with a member of Merritt's editorial team about a different project entirely. A professional connection, unremarkable on its own, except that it meant she had a plausible route to an advance copy and a reason no one had thought to look. She had just attached her real frustration to something she hadn't actually done. Which brings me to the part of this case that nobody in the legal coverage touched. And it's the part that should actually change how you think about stories like this, including ones you haven't heard yet. Stay with me. But here is the thing that stays with you. The original jury had heard 18 months of evidence. They'd sat with this case, they'd believed her, and in the architecture of her story, everything had been real enough. The grief, the frustration, the sense of being invisible, the image of a powerful industry grinding down a nobody. All of that was real. She had just attached it to something she hadn't done. Literary fraud is rarer than people think, but not rare. In 2006, Kavya Viswanathan's debut novel was pulled after readers identified passages lifted nearly verbatim from multiple published books. In 2018, romance author Christiane Sarouya was found to have plagiarized dozens of writers, including Nora Roberts. What made those cases clean was that the plagiarist was obvious. The text was right there. This case had no clean villain. Just a woman who wanted to matter, and a man whose success she couldn't accept, and 18 months of a story that felt true, because the emotion underneath it was true. The lesson that publishing drew from this was technical. Metadata hygiene. Most writers don't think about what their files record. Every document you create carries a creation date, a modification history, a device ID. If you're ever in a dispute about when something was made, that data is discoverable. It can save you or destroy you. That's the practical lesson. Here's the one that's harder to hold. This is what I told you. Nobody asked at the beginning. Nobody asked, what does the person who did this have to understand about us to make it work? Because Carla's case succeeded for 18 months, partly because she understood narrative. She knew what a victim looked like. She gave people something they were already primed to believe. The truth wasn't what broke her. A single reporter, a public records request, and a date 4 days too late. That's what broke her. So, one of them was lying. Now you know which one. The appeal is still working through the courts. Merritt published a second novel last year. Carla has not spoken publicly since Anand's piece ran. The tearful press conference is still online if you want to watch it. And you'll believe her. That's the thing. And this is the part that should make you sit with it for a moment. Even knowing everything you know now, you'll watch her cry in the rain and you'll feel something. Because the performance was real, even if the story wasn't. And that's not a flaw in you. That's the mechanism. That's the whole machine. It doesn't exploit your gullibility. It exploits your empathy. It finds the thing you already believe is true about the world. That institutions fail people. That talent goes unrecognized. That the powerful protect each other. And it wears that as a costume. The emotion is the alibi. Which means the question this case actually leaves you with isn't whether Carla was a good liar. It's whether any of us handed the same story at the same moment, would have looked for the timestamp, or whether we would have just felt the rain. If you want to see more cases like this one, stories where the truth took longer to arrive than anyone expected, subscribe. And drop a comment telling me what you want covered next. I read them, and that's genuinely where a lot of these stories come from.